Is it true that the biggest responsibility for Ukur Yatani in the new budget policy statement 2021-2022 is debt repayment? If that is true, though, as some analysts are saying, we have to support that by the data trends that we're going to look at this morning. And if you haven't looked at that document, then you actually need to look at it. It touches on very proper points that will show you exactly how it is that we've been feeding on debt and actually repaying that debt. Now, when he came to the office, he said his biggest plan was to move Kenya away from expensive commercial and syndicated loans. Is that the case, though? Has he done it in his second budget cycle? That's the question that we have this morning. But just before we answer that, let's look at what our trend has been, especially when it comes to interest payments, so that we make sense of that conversation this morning. And I want to pull you to this data that we have for you this morning. Let's look at what has been an annual interest payments on debt. Let's speak on that data this morning, so I can actually talk about it and make sense of it and tell you exactly where the talking points are when it comes to that. All right, let's jump into that data now, because we do have it. Now, the average annual interest payments on a debt, and we're starting all the way from 2015 to 2019 and 2020 as we talk about where we are right now. If you look at where we are, under domestic and foreign, you would actually say that when it comes to those interest payments that we pay for our debt, domestic has been leading on that end. From 2015 all the way to 2019, you will say, well, we borrow more domestically, because that's exactly why we're seeing that. And also you could be talking about the interest rates that are charged on these loans that we get domestically. Fine. Foreign, which also accounts for a bigger repayment, but there's only one thing that's going to come from this data here this morning, because if you look at from 2015 all the way to 2019-2020, on the foreign interest payments on debt, they have been on a rising trend, and we're talking about it in terms of billions. You will see exactly where we are in 2019-2020, even as we chart the course for 2021-2022, with the analysts saying that this is going to be the biggest interest payments on a debt that Yatani is going to face, because they're saying it's going to rise by 24%. All right. Let's throw our eyes again to an annual average deficit in terms of our budget, so we see exactly how we have been managing our debt cycle in the country. Because we do know the deficit that we are talking about, the budget policy statement 2021-2022 is at around 974 billion. So have we been managing it? Yes and no at the same time, because if you look at where we are from 2015 to 2019, 2020, again, you can talk about it being on a rising trend, meaning that we haven't been really able, therefore, to actually sort of manage our deficit in every budget cycle, which therefore throws again light onto another conversation point that you must have here, is that if the promise for the government is actually take us away from expenditure that we can't account for, or from expenditure that we really do not deserve, why has been our annual average deficit been increasing year on year in every budget cycle? Good. Now, bigger question in the room: annual government expenditure trend. How has it been all the way from 2015 to where we are right now? And if you look at that data we're going to cross onto shortly, then it's going to be pretty much clear for you that if you look at our annual government expenditure, good, this is where we are, 2015 all the way to 2019, 2020. Look at that trend, always on a rise, and this now we're starting with a 2.9, close to 3 trillion budget that we're talking about in the Ukur Yatani's 2021-2022 financial year, which highlights how our spending has been all the way from 2015 up to where we are right now, always on a rising trend. Therefore, which begs the question again, what is the conversation point here? We talk about it and put it into proper focus on exactly how we can criticize this trend. What does it mean? And does our economy reflect what this data means? This morning here on Business M. What we do know though, in terms of where we are, in terms of our budget policy 2020, 2021, 2022, what we do know is that while our domestic loans are bound to rise by 409 billion shillings, good, that's what we stand, from 340 billion. That is in terms of where it used to be. That is a year before. Now, if you look at where we are also in terms of domestic payments, they will amount to 177.8 billion from 134.1 billion. If you see where we are in terms of outstanding domestic debt, we stand at 3.49 trillion, accounting for a bigger chunk of that money that we owe. Questions being, are we able to support that expenditure that has been always on a rise? We answer that question this morning. Another very important conversation point this morning is exactly the way in which counties have been given that money. And now I want us to look at exactly what has been the equitable share to the county governments all the way from 2013 to where we are up to now. And if you look at that data that we have for you, they're going to see something very interesting, and we're going to put it into proper context, because all the way from 2016, 2017, 2019, 2020, yes, it has been on a rise. Fine, despite the conversation points that arise from this area. But why are we talking about this data this morning? I will tell you why. Because now the controller budget is quite, I would say, raising an alarm in the way in which county governments are spending this money. Let's talk about it this morning, because under that some counties now, in terms of exactly they've been spending this money, they're saying that they have been breaking the Public Finance Management Act of 2015 that allows counties to spend up to 35% of their total revenues in a fiscal year on salaries and allowances. Now, under this, they're saying that the money that has been spent so far, if you go back to the last financial year, it has been 171.8 billion on salaries and allowances against what they have been able to give, that is in terms of the revenue collection, at 411.96 billion, up from 162 billion when income was at 445.36 billion. That is, go back a year earlier. We're talking about the 2018-2019 period. So if you compare that when they were at 445.36 billion, they spent 162.8 billion on salaries. But now, when they are on 411.96 billion, they are spending 171.8 billion on salaries, and that's when the controller of budget is quite putting a warning outside there to the counties to remain within the Public Finance Management Act of 2015 that only allows counties to spend up to 35% of the total revenues in a fiscal year on salaries and allowances. Good. Let's cross over to another talking point that we're talking about this morning in terms of the way in which the counties cannot get into their own source revenue model, which, as we do know, only 3 counties, just a couple of counties have been meeting. Now, what we do know is that each county has been using their own form of revenue collection. Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta, what we do know, he put on a team back in 2019 February that was supposed to form a single integrated county revenue management system. Now, currently, counties use 11 collection systems, and now what they're saying, they're going to make them use one systems, because the ones that have been using these systems have been on trial, have been collecting their monies properly. Now let's talk about how much money they collected. They collected 4.55 billion, all right, that is the year ended June, and it dipped by 4.55 billion from the counties, and the controller budget indicates that 35.77 billion was raised in that period. That is an 11.2% fall from the 40.3 billion a year earlier. Now, what we're saying that under that, even as we look at budget allocation and the equitable share to the counties, which has also been on a drop, is that now they're going to use one system. And this system has been piloted by and proposed by Treasury and KRA. We also do know the conversations that have been around how KRA has been struggling to get monies from the counties. Is this going to be effective? This is going to be spoken about as well. Now, let's cross over to another area that we do know, the bigger meeting. That is the MPC meeting that's supposed to happen today in the morning. And why is this important? Because it happens at a time when food prices and also inflation in general has been on an all-time high. Let's look at that quarter by quarter, therefore, inflation rate up to where we are now, so that we put it into proper perspective. And from that data, in terms of the inflation numbers, you're going to see that are actually up to where we are right now. Good. Look at that. You can say it's been on a high, and we're starting 2021 also on a note in this sense. Now, we do know that tax rates are back to where they used to be. VAT is back to 16%. Payee is back to where it used to be. Corporation tax is back to where it used to be, despite the number of job losses and company closures and company struggles and the economy struggles. Also in 2020, we are back to where we are as of this January 2021. So the question is going to be, are they going to be moved when they're setting the CBR? That's exactly what it is that we're waiting for. What we can say is the average lending, that's the average lending rate from the Central Bank of Kenya. This data that we're showing you in just a couple seconds will also show you that, well, we have been on an all-time low. Some that have blamed the CBK for taking a customer approach only in the industry. But now, bigger conversation is going to be, is the rate of inflation going to move the MPC in giving us a different CBR when it comes to what has been a fifth consecutive setting of that rate in the entire of 2020, which was at exactly 7%.